Real quick, just the agenda is a little different than probably the agendas that you normally see with these grand objectives and so many different take home points and so on and so forth. I really wanted to go back and I've been really studying some different things about critical thinking, and really, I've been talking with middle school teachers that I coach baseball with. One individual coaches high school baseball with me, and he teaches seventh and eighth graders. And I said, man, a lot of our incoming college freshmen are just lacking some basic things. And he said, yeah, like what? I said, well, just asking questions. The typical five W's and an H. So who, what, where, when, why. I said, oh, I think I'm going to use that in a major presentation at from the Ohio State University to the Johns Hopkins University. I mean, these are world known names. So we're gonna have this agenda as our process here. So financial disclosures, I advise for a supplement company, and financial support, everything from NIAMS to Department of Defense. I do some stuff with the special operations community also. So those are a little bit different hats that I wear. So hopefully everybody sees this thing right now. So this is a frog, right? I don't know what type of frog. I don't know what jungle. I don't know what species. I don't know. But I know that the view of the frog is very, very much concerned with a small radius around itself. It deals with what's right in front of it, right onto the side of it, and right behind it. And as clinicians, oftentimes this is where we stop. We just deal with what we see right in front of us, what we need to take care of, right? What checkpoints we need to do, whether that's paperwork. As educators, we do the same thing. What class do we need to teach today? And what do we need to get done? And we sometimes don't see the rest of the forest. Then there's the administrator side, or the big picture side, or the program director side, or whatever hat you want to wear. And you see this big landscape, and you're trying to understand how to get this ecosystem in order, and you're seeing this whole mountain landscape and everything. And sometimes we forget what that day to day feels like, and what problems we need to solve, and what issues we need to address in either patients or colleagues or staff members or so on and so forth. So I wear both these hats. I normally live in this from a research standpoint, the bird's eye view. So if you're expecting me to give you the details of fMRI and exactly what voxels we do and so on and so forth, that's not me. That's why I have students, and that's why we have staffing for those types of things. But I can give you the ideas and the general ideas. So we're going to have a big overview or bird's eye view of a lot of things today. So my laboratory history is from the traditional laboratories with VO2 maxes and biomechanics, cutting and pivoting, jumping and landing. But I also do a lot in weight rooms and on the fields. I'm a certified athletic trainer, so I've been involved in the medical side of those things. But I also have 2 degrees in exercise science, so I'm also involved in the sport performance side of things. I also coach high school baseball and summer travel baseball at a high level. And so I've been involved in the clinical side of those types of things. And then understanding the patient rehabilitation, our center is right attached to the physical therapy area that we have. So it just gives you a little background of where I'm coming from. So let's just think about the who. And some of you, this may be very familiar information, or it may not be close to what you do. But just think about taking this information to who you work with. And it's really more of a paradigm focus than it is techniques and specifics. So one of the things that has always interested me is this whole neuro versus ortho world. And we see this a lot within the physical therapy community. We see this a lot in the athletic trainer community. We see this a lot in the occupational therapy, physicians, so on and so forth. To me, I really don't understand the difference because they're all kind of together. So I really view clinicians, and I don't mean a certain type of clinician. I mean all clinicians. So for me, clinicians from rehabilitation specialists to physicians to coaches, to me, our clinicians are really applied neuromuscular scientists. And we need to understand and embrace those things as we go through. So let's just kind of have a question of what's neural load. And we're not going to get too much into our questions here. I'm going to make it a little bit easier for you to interact. But let's just consider one of the basics that we do for knee rehabilitation. These are quad sets. This is one of the earliest things that we do for somebody post-surgical. These are some of the things that we do trying to create muscle activation for somebody who's had, you name it, knee osteoarthritis, ACL injury, so on and so forth. And we probably would consider that to be a low neural load. So now let's just move up into a higher category, a single leg hop. Now we have to bear weight. Now we have to do that on a single balance system. Now let's think about changing direction. We have a single leg hop, we cut onto one leg, and now we have to pivot and come off. Now we have to do that with a ball, whether it's a football or basketball or soccer ball, so on and so forth, chasing a ball. And then we have to do that while keeping track of players. Now our neural load is starting to go up and up and up. Yet oftentimes we, in our clinical setting, end with things that aren't really the reality of what they're returning to. So we have to think about all these things, but it's no different than in my head of a clinician. My mother was just here. She's 86 years old, and we hadn't cut the grass yet in the yard. And she was trying to traverse the yard, and it wasn't easy. Why? Because the surface was really difficult for her. The grass was high. She was moving, and we had to provide more support. Also, the dogs running around. Also, there's neighborhood kids waving. So it's an entirely different environment than a closed environment of working in a clinical setting. And it challenged her, and we worked on those types of things. But it's the same concept. The same concept for an athlete and an ACL injury, same concept for my mother who's 86 years old with some balance issues. So population of who? This population tends to be young active individuals, and they seem to get younger and younger every year. And we can go through the whole incidents. This is for those of you who aren't really familiar with the ACL aspects. ACL is the anterior cruciate ligament, one of the primary stabilizers in the knee. We see that we have approximately 200,000 a year, a cost in the billions. One of the biggest concerns, though, is that we have second injury. Now, there's a variety of factors that can go into that. Why? Returning too early, returning when not ready. Obviously, there's patient values to those types of things, so they want to be back sooner rather than later. And then the bigger long-term cost is the osteoarthritis associated with that, and then the long-term disability that we are concerned about. So just a real quick getting into the function of the ACL, resist anterior translation of the tibia on the femur. Very simple piece, very important for deceleration and landing components. Let's see if you guys can see this video and pick out where this happens. So left foot plant, nobody hit him, got hit afterwards. So not only did he tear his ACL, and then he gets hit afterwards and he misses the entire season. So that's a NFL quarterback going through some issues. Now, this is where we get response. So this is a injury or not injury. You have to determine if this individual got injured on this play. Those of your soccer fans, you may have a little advantage. That's a pretty impressive feat that he just accomplished. And we're going to see that again because I want to give you a little bit of highlights, and this is going to be our discussion points here. So if I can get the video going. Big jump, perturbation, gets hit, aligns, has to head the ball into a goal, lands on one leg, comes down. Now the question is, did he get hurt or not? So let's see in the chat or reactions, or you can talk, or you can do something to interact a little bit. But did he injure his knee or not? It might be just me and Tracy just talking here. He didn't. Pablo said he, Dr. Selnick, is that correct? I'll go by Pablo on those things. I go by Jimmy for everyone, so please don't call me James. I should have changed my name on here. No. So we either have a ton of soccer fans, football fans for those of you from the mother countries of football, Participated in next game, so no. Dissipated force with coming down to the left upper extremity. Very good. No injury, no injury, nope. So we have a lot of people who have stating no. Now the question is, how hard impact on an angle will look like to absorb the force? Exactly. So he didn't. I mean, he was very, very high in the air, getting perturbed by an individual almost undercutting him, having to head the ball into a goal after having run probably up and down the field at least a couple of times. So it may be in a fatigue state or those types of things. Why didn't he tear his ACL? So that's a big question. Why does somebody else tear their ACL in such a simple fashion? So that question's been driving me for now you can see my white chin hair for at least 2 decades, or well, more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades. Why? Why does somebody get hurt to begin with? Why does somebody get re-injured? And how can we prevent those things from happening? And that's a really, really, really difficult piece. Yes, greatest athlete on earth, genetics, training at a high neural load, neuromuscular adaptations. Yes, yes, and yes. How do we measure it? How do we translate that to other people? How do we help some of these individuals go through it? And maybe we can't. And that's one of the things that I'm coming to realize is that we're, number one, not going to be able to help everybody. Number two, uh, number two, are we going to be able to help some individuals? Messi's better. I'm not quite sure. He might be a little bit tactically better, but his athleticism isn't the same. I like this group. This is good. You guys are good. So my parents, just to give you a little background, my parents grew up in Chile. They immigrated to the United States about 6 years before I was born. They grew up watching and playing soccer. They follow every Chilean national member. And so my TV this past weekend was on everything. Premier League, wherever a Chilean was playing, they were watching. So that's my extent of football knowledge. All right, so what happens here? So let's just think of this. What happens into this thing? So we have a normal 6 to 12 month rehabilitation. Some people are asking for 2 years. Some people come back really, really early. When I was an undergraduate student, it was the early return to sport. And early back then was we were returning people 2.5 months post-surgery. So an individual who tore their ACL in the beginning of football camp in college in August was back on the field playing in October. So for some of you, that might seem like, whoa. And then there's other people on this call maybe remembering saying, hey, we used to throw people in a cast, a full-length cast after ACL reconstruction. So we have some different gamuts of these types of things. But let's just think about this process. And most of the time we focus on the traditional ortho techniques, right? Strength, balance, movement, so on and so forth. Understanding that we have this whole neurological component that is associated with it that we oftentimes just cast aside on a lot of these things. So we know that second ACL injuries, highest risk when their first few months return into activity. We know that quadriceps strength deficits still have major impact. One of my research colleagues, Dr. Schmidt, is very, very good on those sides. So we've kind of partnered up into the PT, AT world to be able to do some of these things together. So we know that we have these deficits. And we know that this is the problem. So we have somatosensory injury. The easiest thing for me to, and instead of getting into all the techniques of the brainstem or the cerebral regions, which we'll get into in a little bit, and going into every single piece, we have reconnected the biomechanical aspects of things by putting the ligament back in when we do ACL, but we haven't reconnected the wiring. We haven't grown new wiring. We haven't been able to piece it together with duct tape, which I know works on so many things, but probably doesn't work in the somatosensory system. But that concept is there. There are people working on some of those aspects to try to think about a duct tape type of idea. And how can we create this environment to be able to manage these things? So one of the things that Dr. Grooms is at Ohio University, 2 different places. Ohio University is about an hour and a half away from Ohio State, but he was my doctoral student here at Ohio State. So a lot of this work is Dr. Grooms' dissertation work and then his post work. And it's great to have that. But theoretically, we put out this kind of concept of this theory of we have sensory neuroplasticity. So our afferent input gets disrupted. So the information coming into the system gets disrupted. We get proprioceptive disruption, and then we create this motor neuroplasticity. How are we going to still achieve the tasks that we need to achieve if our input is out, but we're going to still generate some output? So then we get decreased postural control, and then movement control starts to change. And one of the biggest things that we're looking at is the visual aspects. Now, many of you with neuro backgrounds and heavy neuro backgrounds like understand that it's commonplace to have this visual system and a visual disruption. But in the athletic world, we often don't think about those things in training those pieces. So just thinking about this sensory motor reorganization, one of the biggest things is altered processing of sensory and visual information for motor planning. Basically, what we're seeing is that we see alterations in the primary motor cortex, secondary somatosensory cortex, the lingual gyrus, and so on and so forth. There's more than just that. We rely on greater visual feedback after we tear our ACL. Now, the question is this a good thing or a bad thing? So I'm going to come back to it. This is your last question. So you guys get full participation by just answering 2 questions. Is this a good or a bad thing, and why? The why is the hard part. So do relying more on vision after a musculoskeletal disruption problem, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And we can just stop right there and just say good or bad. Bad. Eric goes bad. We're unable to coordinate our proprioceptive system as well. Bad, good. Okay, so we now have some controversy. Bad thing, Ronaldo couldn't see where he was landing. I agree. But Ronaldo could see that the ball was coming, could see that the individual was undercutting him, so could have some visual contributions to his movement control. So let's just think about that in the background. I know that everybody wants to make this a bad thing because our proprioception and our whole joint position sense and everything else with it, okay? But let's just open our minds to the possibility of it being an okay thing as we kind of go down this path. And don't shoot the messenger yet because we don't have all the data on these pieces, but we have theories, and that's what the research is all about. All right, so let's go back. Great. So let's think about the wear motion. So we know within the literature that there's a variety of different alterations go on as we go through these things within the brain structure. So we see sensory areas, we see motor planning areas, we see balance areas, we see visual integration areas, we see a variety of somatosensory areas. So we know that we have that going on. Our very first piece that Dustin did was really going down and doing a very simple complex, right? So when I was a student in the 90s, I kept on going, oh, I just can't wait till we can do fMRI because now we can really do jumping and landing tasks. Well, 3 decades later, we're still just doing very simple knee extension, knee flexion. We've actually added a closed chain type of piece. Now we're going to add a force loading type of piece, but it's still very simplistic. And I can't wait for the days in the future where we'll be able to do a little bit more dynamic movement. But the problem is with the brain and the head movement, we can only kind of do so much on those things. But you can see our paradigm on those things and a little bit of the background of the research design. And this is really kind of spread out through a variety of different groups and different people. So what our findings were is that we see the lingual gyrus or the sensory visual integration upregulates. We see that go up in our individuals with ACL tears versus the controls. And then we see the somatosensory go up and into those types of pieces. We also see, we see the contralateral sensory motor system go up, and we see the cerebellum really go down into those things. So that was our initial work. And so we kind of came to the conclusion of the brain may never be the same after post-ACLR, right? So we have this some loss of somatosensory potential. How do we get that back? Are we going to get that back? And what's the problem of trying to go seek that? A new thought that we are working on here, and this is a little bit of some of the work with Dr. Schmidt, and I know some other people in the country are doing some similar stuff, is this is really a chicken and the egg problem. Maybe the brain wasn't the same to begin with. Maybe pre-injury, they had some poor somatosensory information capabilities. Maybe they have lack of movement adaptability, athleticism deficiencies. A lot of people want to put it into sport specialization aspects or lack of multi-sport, or people want to put it into PE or the Americanization of these elite athletes at a very young age. And we don't know. Measuring those types of things would be a great idea, but it's a large, large undertaking. So let's look at the cartoon of ACL tear surgery, right? So this is from a brace company, and this is cartoonish for some variety of things, like because it's so easy to put rehab in this just very simple complex, right? 1 to 2 weeks after surgery, use crutches, ice compression, elevation, lots of rest to reduce swelling and increase knee extension. Like that's so easy to do, and maybe we're really missing our mark there. 2 to 6 weeks after surgery, begin exercising, so on and so forth. And then 3 to 6 months after surgery, ready to play, and maybe begin to play around 6 to 9 months. It's not that easy. And this isn't the talk to go through the specifics of each part of that. But I want you to think about, most of the literature is really showing that the best time frame is going to be 1 year plus postoperatively. And I can put up a couple other lit reviews, systematic reviews, meta-analysis that are going to show the same thing. So let's just think about the rehab process. And we have our stars kind of align in here. The lightning bolts of thinking about things. So from a rehabilitation standpoint, from a orthopedic standpoint, and then the neurological components within that orthopedic, when is the best time frame to really start intervening to see if this visual processing piece is coming into play, is upregulating as we're rehabbing? Are we causing this? Or is this just part of their system for adaptation that they have? We don't know any of those pieces. Almost all the data that we have is post, usually 2 years after. So we're really starting to look at these earlier time frames and starting to look at when is the best time frame to be able to kind of intervene. And so this study was the very first one for us. We call it, it's very simple. There's many authors on this, but we just basically call it the first author, Caprelli study. And they found some pre-activity and some brain plasticity within that ACL deficiency. That started us off. But think about this injury risk behavior, and you see these models all the time in dynamic valgus and so on and so forth. I can tell you that I've done a tremendous amount of screening in my lifetime. We just finished up an R01 that did over 6,000 high school athletes doing jumps like this. So we probably screened jumping off of a box about 10,000 kids from 18 years of age all the way down to 6 years of age, about 10,000. And not one single individual has ever torn their ACL jumping off a box. So are we just not assessing our screening to the level of where their risk behavior is? So I would say that 10,000 sample size and 0 ACLs doesn't match up within that age population and demographics. So maybe we're not challenging enough in our return to sport activities. Brain behavior relationships, we can see that the neuroplasticity aspects under visual stress changes. So we can see that the ACLR individuals have a different visual stress change than the controls do. So let's just think about our proprioception, and there's a variety of different things out there. So proprioception highly correlated with blind hops. So vision, we increase visual reliance when we decrease afferent information. So this is basic information for most individuals. You sit there going, yes. Visual conditions, when we get vision, we utilize that more. When we don't have vision, we have problems. So now let's think about it from an injury risk standpoint. And this isn't just for ACL individuals. You see visual input within the military for doing, especially special forces, doing night landings and things without or decreased visual pieces. And we see these at-risk movement patterns. And then same thing within non-contact injuries. So that could be ankle sprains or different types of aspects. So let's just think about also a neurocognition load. And this is some of the early work from Buzz Swanek. And we showed some things that have also come in with this, that we see some neurocognitive function relationships. So slower reaction time, processing speed, worse visual and verbal memory, and then is that associated with neuromuscular control? We are seeing a proliferation of new information relative to concussions in athletics and the relationship to musculoskeletal injury. So we understand that there's this kind of continuum of the brain body kind of relationship, which just makes sense. So let's just think about our sensory weighting or reweighting system. So this is a little bit of kind of the new ideas of these things. So we're not going to put a scale to this, but you just see everything's at 100%. Let's just imagine that. So that all three areas are contributing equally. And then following injury, we see the somatosensory area go down. Question becomes, we see a visual reliance go up to make up for that somatosensory go down. Let's just imagine that vestibular stays the same. For that, some of you are vestibular therapists. We can argue back and forth on all these things, but I'm just, for argument's sake, let's just say that vestibular stays the same. Well, there's not much in the literature that shows that we're going to be able to get to somatosensory information to upregulate all the way back to normal. And you can see this with those losses of the mechanoreceptors. Are we going to be able to duct tape the ACL and make it perfect again? I don't think so in my lifetime, but maybe we'll have some big breakthroughs on these types of things, and the human duct tape will be becoming a lot better. So shouldn't we also think about utilizing the visual system while also upregulating the somatosensory system? And I know that's a little bit controversial, especially how you answered in the no responses, that we need the proprioceptive or maybe a short-term effect, but it's not going to be long-term. What I mean by that is not only upregulating the visual system, but upregulating the visual system to detect problems that may occur. So seeing things better on the field, seeing things better in the environment, having the system of the vision piece not only being just that my eyes are open or closed or disturbed, but that I can kind of get the sense that I've been in this environment. Now, the problem is when we start looking at uncontrolled environments, and there's where the strategies come into play, and start thinking about strategies. So again, just kind of recapping some of the pieces there. Do we have a neurocontrol preference strategy as individuals? Does it change following injury? Does it change following rehabilitation? Does it persist over time? So thinking about these preference strategies is very simple conceptually. It's much harder to apply. So let's just take one area, and we're going to do this with two areas. Posterior secondary somatosensory area. So painful stimuli, somatosensory with proprioception, thermal pressure. What are ways that we can try to upregulate that? So is that part of the knee sleeve concept? Is that part of the knee brace concept? Do we have to have some things that help upregulate that knee when it's in a quote unquote decreased somatosensory environment? Is this possibly where I haven't seen a tremendous amount of literature that supports it, but you see athletes all over the place, and the Olympics will come up eventually, and you'll see KT tape all over people again. Is there potential for that to be able to have a small somatosensory effect? Let's think about the posterior inferior temporal gyrus, so another area that we've seen. Visual cortex involved in strategy and integration of information. Is that going to be something that we can see? Let's just think about this environment. We can create these pictures and put them into a virtual environment, and an individual can virtually be back on the field while they're doing the rehabilitation in the clinic. We can think about them and fear avoidance and being able to control those types of things so that we can try to limit and minimize these types of pictures. Now let's kind of gear up into a movement preference strategy standpoint. So a motor somatosensory vision. This concept is, again, just a straight concept, but as animals, do we have different motor movement preferences? I can tell you, if I jumped up in the air like Cristiano Ronaldo, there's no way I could utilize the same strategies that he utilized to be able to avoid injury. I would definitely do a double leg landing. I would definitely roll and drop on the floor to absorb the acceleration. Um, and I would definitely have to utilize more vision to basically probably not even jump. So you have to think about what are some of those movement preferences when we go through, very similar to the posture control strategy preferences that have historically been involved in all balance type of assessment. So do we have systems that we can try to assess people's preference and be able to upregulate those types of systems based on what they've done? So, is there a neural preference strategy for movement control? Is it fixed or can it be altered following musculoskeletal injury? Does the rehabilitation process contribute to altering this neural preference strategy? Can we create targeted rehab interventions? Those are things that we're working on. We don't have all those answers right now. So, just a little bit of framework and what this is Dr. Groom's Department of Defense, and that I'm a co-investigator on. But this is a concept that we've kind of put out there and really follow along in the yellow. And for many of you, this is like, oh, sure, this is what we've always been taught to do. Well, I can tell you for 20 years ago, this is not what we were taught to do. And this is not what we were preaching to do relative to ACL injuries. Sensory visual motor training, utilization of somatosensation via modified visual feedback, and then creating an adaptive sensory motor control strategy. So just a little trigger warning for those of you who have a little problems visually. But we started thinking, how can we create vision disturbances or changes without just closing eyes and opening eyes? And so Nike had these things. Now there's Synaptech glasses and goggles, and these are some of the things that we do. I use these things as baseball coach also in training individuals. So not only from an injury rehabilitation, but an injury prevention standpoint. So can we create some different training paradigms? Can we create those within our rehabilitation setting? Can we create some upregulation or downregulation of a system? Not sure. So let's just think, outside of the goggles. And these are things that I know all of you promote on a regular basis. So third person point of view on mirrors, first person watch self, fixate on a visual point versus a visual interference. And it could just be hands in front of face and different types of things, putting a flag in front of somebody or those types of things. Changing the gaze fixation point, make it nearer, make it further. Feedback monitors. So this is from the Centron device. I know some of you might use some of the BTE products, but we're looking at trying to control not necessarily the amount, but can I take this window that they have to be in and can I tighten it and widen it so that I can see their control parameters? Can we use some of these fit lights to be able to get some measurement outcomes back while they're also doing standing dynamic, and we can get some measurements of how long and how fast they can do some of those types of things? And then some of the traditional type of clinical ideas, right? So dense foams and Bosu squats and so on and so forth. And then doing our normal stuff that we've been doing for decades, tennis balls and different types of balls. But can we also have things that just have to challenge the system a little bit more? Catch the pink one, not the yellow one. Only block the black one, don't catch it. Catch the even numbers for the ping pong balls. Things to kind of upregulate the demands prior to getting out on the field. We can do these things early in rehab. And then let's just also think about holistic screening of athletes. Instead of just looking at one biomechanical variable or one posture control variable or one vestibular variable, let's think about everything that we have around it. Let's think about the physical characteristics and functional outcomes that they have. Let's think about the environment. The environment for an athlete, even though they may be carrying weight like a football player, is entirely different than a military soldier or a firefighter or a police officer carrying weights. So we have to think about that and get closer to that. What neurological components can we do from a screening standpoint? Can we match up with other neurological assessments that are being done in the concussion world or the traumatic brain injury world and those types of things? Obviously, injury history. The biggest thing that came out of the R1 that I just finished was previous injury history is still the strongest predictor, 2.7 for ACL tears and ankle sprains in high school athletes. So 2.7 times greater if you've previously had a injury, that's there. So it's still understanding individuals' history is important. And then behavior and psychological aspects, risk aversion, risk seeking, fear, those types of things, and how they drive movement. So nearing the end here, I think one of the big things that as clinicians, we need to always understand, we need to find our why, but we need to find our patient's why also, and really help to shape that and understand why is it that they're doing, why are these things happening, and what can I do to be able to help them. So just a little kind of plug for the, you know, the eyes or the vision. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? I'm not still sure. You guys can reach me. We can talk anytime. You can follow me on Twitter and all that stuff, and whatever you want. Thank you for your time. Thank you for everybody attending. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of ideas, and hopefully I reached one person with one thought. That's it. That was my goal. Questions? I put everybody asleep. This is where in my class I'll start asking.
Hi, Dr. Onate. This is Preeti Raghavan. I'm the Vice Chair for Research in the department. Thank you for a very stimulating talk. I wanted to ask you if stiffness is one of the issues that you come across, and how that interacts with the somatosensory dysfunction you were talking about. How do the muscles compensate for this ACL injury?
Yeah, that's a whole nother line of inquiry, physiological line of inquiry on stiffness, and is having some increased joint stiffness following the injury, right? A good thing or a bad thing? And we see this within the structure, right? So one is a protective mechanism, right? So if we can increase the stiffness, we're going to increase the capabilities, muscle stiffness, hamstring stiffness following this. So the hamstring counteracts with the ACL, collaborates with the ACL to prevent anterior tibial translation. So if we increase hamstring stiffness, are we going to be able to aid or help the ACL within its function? That's one theory. Problem with that is, especially for those who follow in the soccer community, the number of hamstring tears and the hamstring capabilities can cause a similar of a problem as an ACL tear. So I think stiffness is, again, another area to investigate. It is a protective mechanism, but just like a lot of things that we do in our human system, we tend to overprotect, and then that causes a line of other problems. So I think that's a great idea to investigate further and further and further in that area, just the entire mechanical properties and how do they change during time and how do they change during rehabilitation. And oftentimes we see we're animals. What's our first instinct? Our very first instinct is protective mechanisms. They don't align very well with performance capabilities. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the Messi fans out there, you're not upset that I didn't put them up on the screen? Or maybe there's MLS US soccer fans out there wondering why I didn't put any US folks in there. We'll let it slide. Thank you, Evan. That's good. Well, I'm wide open. I know I tried to give you a lot of information in a very short period of time. I didn't want to go super into so many different findings. I just really wanted to put the thought in your head. We've been so proprioceptive driven, trying to get the somatosensory systems back up and running. And yes, we need that. We have seen just this upregulation of vision. And one of the ideas that's been kind of promoted is to try to downregulate the visual dependence. And that is I'm not sure that's still the best answer. I saw the last chat. So Stephen, yes, U.S. women's soccer team. I was at North Carolina when, and working camps when the 90s soccer team were basically camp counselors. The best soccer in the world was the coaches' games prior to them. They were on the national team, but they weren't obviously getting all this publicity. And they would play the coaches' games with no referees, and it was phenomenal soccer. It was the best women playing, basically pick up football, soccer, and nobody got injured. No, it was amazing. So yes, the U.S. Women's National Team.
Dr. Onate?
Yes.
Oh, I do have a question for you.
Okay, and I'll answer Eric's after. Yep.
Okay. So the question is kind of a comparison, right? So, with ACL injury and then reconstruction, oftentimes players don't return to like the same level of play. But when you compare it to like a Tommy John surgery, the throwers are actually oftentimes better at throwing, like higher speeds of their throws. So I wonder, in your own research, do you feel that has to do with more like proprioceptive and just kind of rehab issues, or do you think, although the ACL that's been grafted is much stronger, it's just not as functional?
I think there's two parts to that. First, I'll unpack the Tommy John side. I'm not sure they're all better in that side from coming back from Tommy John surgery. We just see their stories more often. So there's definitely some literature on that. From the ACL standpoint, yes, obviously the ligament is stronger from a mechanical standpoint, but weakened from a neural standpoint. And I think that's one of the pieces that's difficult to try to assess. I think we also have a really different environment for those things. The baseball throwing environment, especially if it's a pitcher, is a very closed loop environment, very simple, closed system. They do the same thing over and over again. That can be helpful in that their strategies can be really predetermined, and they can do the same thing over and over again. Where in the ACL, it's really hard to get them set and prepared. So again, I don't know if there's ever been a study that shows that Tommy John returns higher than previously, and ACLs return less. I would say both return less optimally, except for in some cases, and those get glorified.
Gotcha.
I would argue that yes, Adrian Peterson came back in the NFL from his ACL surgery in a very, very amazingly short time. But I would also say he's probably not the same running back he was previously. But also he got a little bit older too, so you never know on those sides of things.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Eric, so what are some general preventative strategies for ACL injuries for us who are getting older and still like to engage in recreational sports? Well, one, play with people who understand that taking your legs out is probably not the best idea on a weekend or night soccer game, because winning the championship little trophy or the beer keg or whatever there's going to be there for is probably not as important as your 1 to 2 year ACL recovery. So I would say the environment that you play in is very important as it goes up. I would say number two is just normal strategies of everything, maintaining, good strength, good posture control, good vision, understanding what the system can and can't do. I play basketball still. I also realize I can't do some of the same things. Every once in a while, I forget that I'm going to go up and try to do some stuff. And I coach high school kids, so I'm playing basketball with 15 to 18-year-olds. That's not the easiest thing in the world. So sometimes I just let them go by, and I have to swallow my pride, which is very large. So hopefully that helps a little bit. All right. Well, we're done early, right? So this goes till 1 o'clock. So I'd like to grant the ability of providing 10 minutes to your life. I think that's one of the best things that we can do in Zoom. I'll stay on if you want to, unless there's other questions.
Thank you so much. This was a really fun and interesting presentation. We really appreciate you joining us. This will be recorded. This was recorded, so if people want to be able to watch it, it'll be available on the Hopkins website very shortly. And I'm sure that folks will reach out if they have other questions. Again, thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This has been fun. Hopefully, again, like I said, you learned one thing, and hopefully we had a little fun. That's my goals every day in life. So thank you.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. Take care.
James, I have a question.
Yep.
My name is John. I'm a physical therapist here.
How you doing, John?
Good, good. We do a lot. I mean, obviously there's thousands, hundreds of tests to do to assess kind of readiness or assess risk. And,
yeah,
you know, how would you best assess this? You know, I mean, I think this is something I've been following for the last couple of years as it's kind of gained traction. How would you best assess someone's, I mean, short of doing a fMRI, like how are you going to assess this component of rehab or readiness to compete in your assessment?
I think you do it very similar to a lot of other things that you do, right? So let's take the single leg hop as an example. You know, we can measure it for distance horizontally. We can measure it for vertical height. We can measure it for postural control, right? We can measure it on an X and how far away do they land from the X, right? Are those some ideas that you guys do, or a triple hop or any of those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, we do all that, looking at both quality and quantity.
Right.
I mean, we use the synaptic glasses here, so I do triple hop testing with and without the glasses.
Right. I think that's you're right on it. You're doing your triple hop testing with and without glasses. You're doing triple hop testing with and without with eyes closed. You know, I think you can make some modifications to the synaptic glasses so that they are, you know, there's a little bit of crease underneath it, and making them more snow goggle kind of type, so it's a little bit tighter. So adding some foam underneath so that you can do that. But I think you're right on it. I mean, you're basically testing in one environment and then testing in another environment, and you can see how much does the visual interference or the lack of vision, right? So interference with the stroboscopic goggles and then eyes closed, and does movement quality change tremendously? Does the, you know, obviously the quantitative measures, right? Do they jump half the distance? Do they jump? And those are things that we need to get better at, looking at the normative aspects of those things. So
yeah,
I would be really thrilled to see your data of people with and without those types of things. I mean, you just tracking that information, what should be normal? Should we see a 15% deficit when they go to visual interference? And should we see a 50% deficit when they go to eyes closed? We don't know that.
right. Yeah, it's a great point. I didn't think to measure. I mean, I do more so video them with the goggles to look at quality versus what's the difference in distance.
Yeah, I think you can do both. I mean, I really think you're looking at both the quantitative and the qualitative. I mean, I can show you some biomechanical video that we had a single leg jump, and the individual, you know, is pretty straight up and down. And then once you had the eyes closed, they're all over the place. And, you know, that is really somebody who's visually dependent. We looked at their fMRI, their visual centers just sparked up everywhere. And it's like, okay, this person has a really visual preference strategy. You know, we used to call it, well, I still sometimes refer to it as visually dominant. We're trying to change it to visual preference. But and then the question becomes, is that the way they've always been? Is that why they got injured to begin with? What if we start down regulating that? Now they're in even more trouble. So that's kind of where we're at. We're still very, very early in this stuff. You know, Dustin in Ohio is doing a lot. He's collaborating with some folks down in Atlanta and Emory. You know, we're still early. I would, you know, me and our doctoral student, Adam Culliver, who's a really good PT, and he's going through this area also. He's going to be doing some fMRI stuff. I said, we're about 5% into this race. He goes, I think we're about 1% in this race. And that's exactly true. And I think you guys out there in the clinical world, like collaborating on looking at stroboscopic goggles, triple hop versus single hop, with and without, would be great. I mean, just you measure, you know what I mean? Consistency.
Yeah, that's a good component. Yeah, because I know I've seen Dusty talk several times, and just kind of the stuff he always brings is kind of eye-opening, and just again another component that we're probably missing.
Yeah. Yeah, and Dustin does a great job. I mean, he really knows the fMRI stuff. You know, the question I always have for him is the chicken and the egg. Do we know if this stuff happened before or after? And then the question is, yeah, we see this visual regulation, upregulation, and we need to kind of sensory reweighting and really get it back to normal. Number one, can we get it back to normal? Number two, is that a bad thing?
Right.
So
Awesome. Thank you.